When a quiet 8-year-old refuses to eat day after day, no matter what food is offered, most teachers might assume it's picky eating or nerves. But when the refusal persists week after week, and the child flinches violently at sudden movements or sounds, the story takes a far darker turn, uncovering a horrifying truth behind one boy's silent starvation and a dedicated teacher who refused to let his suffering remain hidden. Before we dive into the story, let me know where you're watching from today, and if you believe in the power of compassion, please like this video and subscribe for more. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose quiet competence had shaped young minds within the same four walls for nearly 4 decades, recognized the hollow look in Leo's eyes wasn't just shyness. It was a deep, primal fear that resonated with a low, unsettling frequency in the cheerful classroom noise, until, driven by an instinct honed over countless observations, she gently peeled back the layers of his terrified silence and discovered the first, unthinkable clue, a detail so horrifying it shattered the mundane rhythm of the school day and forced her hand toward the phone, her finger punching in the 3 digits that change everything. 911. Eleanor, whose own modest, meticulously kept house down the street echoed more with the ticking of clocks and the rustle of turned pages than the vibrant chaos she expertly navigated daily, felt an unwelcome, painful flicker of kinship with the boy's palpable, suffocating isolation. But nothing in her long career, nothing in her quiet, ordered life, could possibly have prepared Eleanor Vance for the devastating, inhuman truth behind Leo's refusal to eat. A truth far darker and more monstrous than simple starvation alone. Eleanor Vance was a fixture at Oakhaven Elementary, as much a part of the school's landscape as the ancient oak tree spreading its branches over the playground. 40 years. The number itself felt substantial, weighty. She'd seen principals come and go, curriculum fads wax and wane, generations of families entrust their children to her care. Her classroom, room 104, bore the subtle patina of her tenure. The faint scent of chalk dust ingrained in the floorboards, the worn patches on the low reading rug, the colorful, carefully laminated alphabet chart that had likely been there since the Reagan administration. She moved with an economy of motion born of long practice, her presence calming yet authoritative. Her silver hair, once a warm brown, was always neatly pinned back, revealing faint lines etched around eyes that held both kindness and a keen, unwavering sharpness. She favored practical clothing, sensible shoes, comfortable skirts or slacks, and a rotation of cardigans in muted tones, pockets often holding a stray tissue or a confiscated toy car. Retirement loomed, not as a threat, but as a quiet promise of slower mornings, tending the small rose garden behind her bungalow, tackling the stacks of novels piled high on her nightstand. Yet, the daily rhythm of school life, the responsibility of nurturing young minds, the simple, profound reward of seeing a child grasp a new concept, these held a powerful gravity. Her life outside the classroom was one of quiet order. The small bungalow, inherited from her parents, was her sanctuary. Every object had its place. The furniture was old but well cared for. The floors gleamed, the silence broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the low hum of the refrigerator. It was a peaceful existence, deliberately cultivated after a life dedicated to the often chaotic energy of children. She wasn't lonely, she told herself. She was content in her solitude. But sometimes, in the deep quiet of the evening, grading papers under the warm glow of her reading lamp, she felt the echo of the empty spaces in the house, a poignant counterpoint to the vibrant life teeming within her classroom walls. This quietude, this predictable solitude, perhaps made her more attuned to the dissonant silence radiating from her newest student. Principal Thompson represented the newer face of school administration. He was likely in his late 40s, energetic, data-driven, fluent in the language of standardized testing and budget optimization. He respected Eleanor's vast experience, often prefacing suggestions with, "What are your thoughts on this, Eleanor?" But his focus was undeniably on metrics and district directives. He required clear, documented evidence before taking administrative action, wary of parental complaints and potential liabilities. Eleanor understood his position, the pressures he faced from above, but sometimes his adherence to protocol felt like wading through treacle when her intuition screamed for urgency. Then there was Mrs. Gable, the school secretary, stationed behind a perpetually overflowing desk just inside the main entrance. Brenda Gable was the school's unofficial historian and information hub, a whirlwind of brisk efficiency, managing attendance, phone calls, and the constant flow of parents and delivery personnel with a practiced, often harried, cheerfulness. She knew which families were new in town, who was struggling financially, whose parents were going through a messy divorce. Eleanor maintained a cordial, professional relationship with both, sharing necessary information but keeping her deeper concerns close until she felt she had a foundation to stand on. Leo's arrival was abrupt, unsettlingly quiet amidst the usual mid-semester shuffle. He materialized beside Mrs. Gable's desk one Tuesday morning, a small, frail figure swallowed by clothes that seemed too large for his thin frame. He clutched a battered backpack, its straps frayed, its canvas faded. His transfer papers were minimal, hastily filled out, citing relocation as the reason. Standing beside him, radiating an almost aggressive impatience, was his father, David Carter. Carter was a tall man, his features sharp, his eyes constantly scanning, never settling. He wore clothes that were obsessively clean but somehow didn't fit quite right, as if borrowed or newly acquired without regard for size. He held himself rigidly, a coiled tension in his shoulders. Leo stood beside him, unnaturally still, his head bowed, dark hair falling over his forehead, effectively hiding his expression. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, making the shadows under his eyes seem darker, deeper. He looked breakable. The file listed his age as 8, but he possessed the weary stillness of someone much older, someone who had learned that visibility was dangerous. Eleanor, returning from a brief trip to the staff room, paused in the hallway, observing the interaction through the open office doorway. Mrs. Gable was attempting her usual welcoming patter, asking about their move, offering information about school lunches. Carter cut her off with curt, monosyllabic answers, his gaze flicking impatiently towards the clock on the wall. He seemed eager to conclude the transaction, to deposit the boy and leave. As Mrs. Gable gathered the paperwork, Carter placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of reassurance. It was heavy, controlling. Eleanor saw it distinctly, the way Leo's small body went rigid. A flinch so minute it was almost imperceptible, instantly masked by a renewed stillness. Carter either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. "He's quiet," Carter stated flatly, his voice devoid of inflection, addressing Mrs. Gable but not looking at his son. "Doesn't cause trouble." He signed the final form with a quick slash of the pen, gave Leo a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, less an acknowledgement, more a command, and turned, striding out of the office without a word of farewell to the child. The door clicked shut, leaving a vacuum of silence. Mrs. Gable let out a slow breath, her cheerful facade momentarily slipping. She caught Eleanor's eye and gave a slight shake of her head, handing over Leo's thin file. "New transfer," she murmured. "Father seems intense. Just moved into that rental house over on Maple Street." The coldness of the interaction, the father's dismissive departure, Leo's statue-like stillness, and that tiny, telling flinch, it settled uneasily in Eleanor's stomach, a discordant note beneath the bright morning sounds of the school. Oak Haven was a town clinging to its identity in the face of economic headwinds. The main street offered a mixed message. A few trendy cafes and antique shops nestled between empty storefronts and established businesses that had weathered decades. The school, a sturdy brick building from the mid-20th century, was the town's anchor, a place of shared history and community pride. Autumn was in full swing, the air crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Inside room 104, however, the atmosphere was meant to be warm, welcoming. Eleanor introduced Leo to the class with gentle enthusiasm, but when prompted, his own name emerged as a barely audible whisper, lost almost immediately in the classroom murmur. He slid into the offered desk near the back corner, folding himself into the chair, seeming to instinctively seek the shadows, the edges, the places where he was least likely to be noticed. His silence, from the very beginning, felt different. Eleanor had taught painfully shy children before, children who needed time to warm up, who whispered answers and avoided eye contact initially. Leo's silence was not shy. It was absolute, a wall built brick by careful brick. He didn't just avoid eye contact. He seemed physically incapable of meeting another person's gaze for more than a fleeting, terrified second. His eyes, large and dark, were perpetually fixed on his desk, his hands, the floor anywhere but on a human face. And then there was the eating, or more accurately, the complete and utter refusal to eat. The first lunchtime, Eleanor attributed it to nerves. New school, unfamiliar faces, strange food. It was understandable. She placed the standard hot lunch tray, chicken nuggets, green beans, a carton of milk, an apple in front of him, offering a quiet, encouraging smile. Leo recoiled as if the tray itself were hot, shaking his head mutely, his eyes widening in unmistakable panic. He pushed the tray away with trembling fingers, then clasped his hands tightly in his lap, hunching his shoulders as if bracing for a blow. The second day was the same, and the third. Eleanor quietly arranged for him to receive the free lunch daily, ensuring there was no issue of cost, but it made no difference. He refused sack lunches packed by, well, presumably by his father, leaving them untouched in his backpack. He refused snacks offered gently by Eleanor during afternoon breaks. He refused everything. Watching him sit amidst the boisterous, messy lunchtime chaos of the cafeteria, a small, rigid island of starvation in a sea of spilled milk and traded sandwiches, became a source of profound distress for Eleanor. His thinness wasn't just apparent. It was alarming. His clothes hung loosely on his small frame, the skin stretched tautly over his cheekbones and collarbones. Dark, bruise-like circles bloomed beneath his eyes, speaking of chronic exhaustion that went far beyond typical childhood tiredness. He moved with a careful, deliberate slowness, conserving energy, his small face pale and perpetually worried. Eleanor began documenting everything, her years of teaching instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. Her private notebook, usually reserved for curriculum notes and parent communication logs, became the repository for Leo's story, told in fragmented observations. October 15th, 1:15 p.m. Leo refused lunch tray again, visible trembling when offered milk carton. Kept hands tightly clenched in lap. Did not speak all morning. October 17th, 10:30 a.m. Startled violently, flinched back almost hitting desk, when Sarah G. dropped a math textbook nearby. Remained tense, watching doorway, for remainder of lesson. October 22nd, 9:45 a.m. During read aloud, where the wild things are, sat rigid, lips pressed tightly together into a thin white line. No reaction to Max's rumpus. Seems smaller, paler today. October 24th, 12:20 p.m. Cafeteria. Sat hunched. Did not unwrap sandwich from backpack. Watched other children eating with guarded, almost fearful expression. The entries accumulated, each small detail adding another stroke to a deeply disturbing portrait of a child living under an invisible, crushing weight. She knew direct confrontation would be counterproductive, likely terrifying him further. Instead, she focused on building a perimeter of safety around him. She made her movements near his desk slow, predictable, announced. She moderated her voice, keeping it consistently soft and calm when addressing him, never demanding eye contact or verbal responses. She created small, non-threatening opportunities for interaction, leaving a polished stone or a brightly colored feather on his desk for him to discover, offering wordless picture books during quiet reading time. He might touch the object hesitantly, trace a line on a page, but he remained enclosed in his silent world. Lunchtime remained the crucible. Eleanor tried different strategies. Sitting at his table but focusing on other children, placing a small, appealing snack like a granola bar discreetly near his elbow without comment, ensuring no other children pressured him. Nothing worked. The fear associated with food seemed absolute, insurmountable. He would physically shrink away from offered items, sometimes letting out a tiny, choked gasp if food came too close. One afternoon, During art, the assignment was simple: draw your favorite food. Construction paper and crayons were distributed, and the room soon filled with enthusiastic depictions of pizza slices dripping with cheese, towering ice cream cones, bowls of brightly colored cereal. Leo sat staring at his blank white paper for a long time, his crayon clutched tightly in his hand. Eleanor moved around the room, offering quiet encouragement. She paused near Leo's desk. Finally, after several minutes of tense stillness, he hesitantly picked up a black crayon. With small, jerky movements, he drew a single, lopsided circle in the bottom corner of the vast white expanse. He stopped, put the crayon down, and stared at the empty circle. Eleanor knelt beside his desk, keeping her voice gentle. "That's an interesting start, Leo. Can you tell me about your drawing?" He didn't look up, but after a long pause, he whispered, the sound barely audible above the classroom hum. "A plate. Just that. An empty plate." The stark simplicity, the utter desolation captured in that single word and the empty circle, pierced Eleanor's heart. It wasn't just a drawing. It felt like a confession, a glimpse into a world devoid of nourishment, both literal and emotional. The image burned itself into her mind, solidifying her resolve. Procedures and protocols be damned. She couldn't let this continue. She requested a meeting with Principal Thompson, laying out her notebook, detailing weeks of observations. The consistent refusal of all food, the alarming thinness, the pronounced flinching, the extreme withdrawal, the empty plate. Thompson listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern, but his hands were tied by the lack of overt, undeniable evidence. "Eleanor, I share your concern deeply," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of administrative caution. "But his father insists he's just sensitive and adjusting. We have your observations, which are valuable, but they are largely behavioral. Without clear physical signs of neglect, bruises we can see, credible reports of being left alone, something concrete, or Leo disclosing abuse himself, initiating a formal CPS report is risky. It could alienate the parent, potentially make things worse for the boy if Carter retaliates, and open the school to legal challenges if we're wrong." He suggested trying to schedule a parent-teacher conference. Maybe a direct conversation with Mr. Carter? Express concern about his eating habits, frame it as a health issue. Eleanor felt a chill go down her spine at the thought. Engaging David Carter felt like poking a sleeping dragon. The man's eyes were cold, hard. She suspected a conference would achieve nothing but putting Carter on high alert, making him even more guarded, potentially increasing the danger for Leo. She left Thompson's office feeling frustrated, helpless, but more certain than ever that the system's requirements for proof were failing this child. She started paying closer attention during dismissal, hoping to glean more from the brief interactions between father and son. Carter's pickup routine was erratic. Some days he was precisely on time, standing silently by the door, his presence alone enough to make Leo tense. Other days he was conspicuously late, leaving Leo waiting anxiously by the office window, a small, forlorn figure watching the other children greet their parents with hugs and excited chatter. Eleanor would often linger in her classroom, tidying up, pretending to be busy, just to keep an eye on him until Carter finally arrived. On one such afternoon, Carter showed up nearly 30 minutes late, storming into the office, his face dark with anger. He didn't apologize for his tardiness. He simply grabbed Leo's arm, too roughly, Eleanor noted, filing the detail away, and muttered, "Let's go," pulling the boy forcefully behind him. Leo stumbled, trying to keep up, his face pale with fear. Eleanor watched them disappear down the hallway, her stomach twisting with a mixture of anger and impotence. It was during these observations, this heightened scrutiny, that Eleanor began to notice something else, something subtle and deeply disturbing about Leo's mouth. He never smiled openly. Even moments of potential amusement, a classmate's silly antics, a funny part in a story, might elicit a flicker in his eyes, but his lips remained firmly pressed together. He drank from the water fountain carefully, taking small, slow sips, almost wincing. He kept his hands habitually away from his face, unlike other children who might chew on a pencil or rest their chin in their hands. First, she dismissed it. Perhaps he was self-conscious about losing baby teeth. But Leo was 8. His permanent front teeth should be well established or emerging. The consistency of the behavior, coupled with his aversion to eating, planted a seed of suspicion so monstrous, so contrary to basic human decency, that her mind initially refused to fully form the thought. Why would a child guard his mouth with such vigilance? Why would the simple act of drinking seem painful? What could possibly? The fragmented thoughts coalesced into a hypothesis too horrifying to voice, yet it lingered cold and sharp at the edges of her consciousness. Her quiet bungalow, once a place of peaceful retreat, now felt like a command center for a desperate, one-woman mission. Evenings were spent poring over child abuse resources online, comparing Leo's behaviors to documented signs of severe neglect and physical cruelty. The more she read, the more the pieces seemed to fit, pointing towards a reality she could barely comprehend. Retirement felt like a distant, irrelevant luxury. Her entire focus narrowed to the small, silent boy in her classroom. She felt a profound sense of isolation. Principal Thompson was bound by rules, Mrs. Gable could offer sympathy but not intervention, and Leo himself was locked behind a wall of terror. She realized, with chilling certainty, that she was likely the only person in a position to uncover the truth, the only one close enough, watchful enough. She had to find a way through his defenses, not by force, but by creating an island of absolute safety where the truth, however terrible, might finally find the courage to surface. She redoubled her efforts, dedicating small pockets of time each day solely to being near Leo, offering quiet companionship without expectation. She'd sit beside him during independent work, humming softly, perhaps commenting idly on the pattern of the rain against the windowpane. She made sure he saw her eating her own lunch calmly, without comment on his refusal. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she felt the faintest thawing in his rigid defenses. He stopped flinching quite so violently when she approached. Occasionally, his gaze would flick towards her face for a microsecond before darting away. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The horrifying confirmation arrived not with a shout, but with a choked cry, shattering the mundane quiet of a Wednesday afternoon block-building session. The children were scattered around the rug, constructing towers and bridges with focused concentration. Leo, participating silently as usual, knelt beside a low wooden table, his small hands surprisingly steady as he placed one block carefully atop another. He reached for a triangular roof piece, stretching slightly, lost his precarious balance, and tipped forward. His chin connected with the edge of the low table, not a hard blow, more of a clumsy bump, the kind of minor collision that happened countless times a day in a room full of young children. But Leo's reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. A sharp, strangled gasp tore from his throat. He clapped both hands tightly over his mouth, his eyes flying wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He scrambled backward, stumbling over his own feet, silent tears instantly streaming down his pale face. He curled into himself on the floor, rocking slightly, muffled whimpers escaping from behind his clamped hands. Eleanor was across the room and kneeling beside him before the other children fully registered what had happened. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a sickening premonition solidifying in her gut. "Leo, honey, are you okay? What happened? Did you bite your lip?" she asked, keeping her voice as calm and soothing as she could manage, despite the tremor she felt starting in her own hands. He shook his head frantically, violently, eyes screwed shut now, refusing to remove his hands, his small body trembling uncontrollably. Gently, carefully, Eleanor placed a hand on his back, feeling the tremors ripple through him. "It's all right, Leo. Shoo, it's okay. Let Ms. Vance see. Just let me see if you're bleeding. It was just a little bump." She didn't try to pull his hands away, knowing it would only increase his panic. Instead, she kept her voice low, murmuring reassurances. After a long moment, his sobbing subsided slightly into ragged gasps. Hesitantly, still watching her with terrified eyes, he slightly loosened the pressure of his hands. And Eleanor saw. Through the small gap between his fingers, illuminated by the fluorescent classroom lights, she saw the raw, gaping horror within his small mouth. It wasn't just missing baby teeth. It was mutilation. Where his upper front teeth should have been, there were only ragged, swollen, inflamed gums. Several teeth, clearly permanent ones judging by the spacing, were gone, crudely extracted. The surrounding tissue was red, raw, looking painfully infected. The sight was so profoundly shocking, so barbaric, that Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her breath caught in her throat. The unthinkable suspicion crashed into reality with the force of a physical blow. His father hadn't just withheld food. He had taken his son's teeth. As punishment, as control. The sheer monstrousness of it left her reeling. For a paralyzing second, the world tilted. The cheerful primary colors of the classroom seemed garish, mocking. The innocent chatter of the other children faded into a distant buzz. All she could see was Leo's terrified face, his mutilated mouth, the unimaginable suffering reflected in his eyes. A wave of nausea washed over her, followed by a surge of protective fury so intense it burned away the shock. She gathered the trembling boy into her arms, holding him tightly, shielding his face from the curious stares of his classmates. "Shoo, Leo. It's okay now," she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with emotion she fought to control. "It's okay. You're safe now. Ms. Vance is here. I'm going to help you." She held him until his trembling began to subside, her mind racing, formulating a plan amidst the chaos of her own horror. Gently, she helped him up, settled him in a quiet reading corner with a soft blanket and a picture book, ensuring he felt as secure as possible. Her movements became automatic, driven by adrenaline and decades of ingrained responsibility. She walked, numb but resolute, to the classroom phone mounted on the wall. Her hand, surprisingly, was rock steady as she lifted the receiver. She glanced back at Leo, huddled in the corner, a tiny casualty in a war she hadn't known he was fighting. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. Her finger found the number 9, pressed it, then 1 again. The dial tone vanished, replaced by the calm voice of the emergency dispatcher. Eleanor identified herself, stated her location, and then, in a low, clear voice that betrayed none of the horror churning inside her, she reported suspected severe, ongoing child abuse and deliberate physical injury, the words tasting like bile in her mouth. She gave Leo's name, his father's name, and the specific sickening details she had just witnessed. After concluding the call, she immediately dialed Principal Thompson's extension. "Arthur," she said, her voice tight, urgent. "You need to come to room 104 immediately. I've called 911 regarding Leo Carter. The situation is critical. It involves severe physical abuse. Immediate danger." Hanging up the phone felt like severing the final thread connecting her to the ordinary world. Everything had changed. The ensuing hour unfolded in a surreal, high-stakes ballet of controlled crisis management. Principal Thompson arrived within moments, his usual administrative composure visibly shaken as Eleanor quietly briefed him on the horrifying discovery. He immediately secured the classroom, initiating a soft lockdown, instructing Mrs. Gable via intercom to hold all calls and visitors, citing a contained medical situation to prevent widespread panic. Eleanor focused entirely on Leo, sitting beside him in the quiet corner, murmuring reassurances, projecting a calm she was far from feeling. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, a sound that simultaneously promised rescue and signaled the terrifying gravity of the situation. 2 uniformed police officers, their faces professional but somber, arrived first, followed closely by Ms. Ramirez, a woman from Child Protective Services whose calm demeanor and kind eyes radiated competence. They spoke with Eleanor privately near the classroom door, out of Leo's earshot. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the weeks of observation, the refusal to eat, the flinching, culminating in the horrifying discovery moments earlier. She provided her meticulously kept notebook, its pages filled with dated, objective observations that now formed a damning indictment. Ms. Ramirez listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim. She then approached Leo with remarkable sensitivity, kneeling beside him, introducing herself softly. Leo flinched initially but didn't bolt. He seemed to sense, perhaps, a shift in the power dynamic, a potential source of safety in her calm presence, especially with Eleanor protectively nearby. The agreed-upon plan was to intercept David Carter upon his arrival for pickup. Ms. Ramirez and the officers waited discreetly near the main office while Principal Thompson prepared to meet him. Eleanor remained with Leo in the classroom, the door slightly ajar, allowing her to hear fragments of what transpired in the hallway. She heard Carter's heavy footsteps approaching, his impatient voice demanding to know why he'd been summoned. She heard Principal Thompson's calm but firm tone, requesting he step into the office. Then, the lower, authoritative voices of the police officers and Ms. Ramirez joining the conversation. The door to the principal's office closed. Eleanor couldn't hear the specifics, only the muffled cadence of voices, Carter sharp, incredulous, and angry at first, then gradually tapering off into what sounded like stunned silence as the weight of the evidence, Eleanor's detailed notes. The undeniable physical proof Ms. Ramirez had briefly confirmed by gently examining Leo's mouth with his hesitant consent, was presented. There was no shouting match, no dramatic struggle audible from the classroom. Just the chilling efficiency of the system finally closing in. Less than an hour later, Eleanor saw David Carter being escorted out of the school by the police officers. His face pale, rigid, his eyes darting around with a mixture of fury and disbelief before settling on the doorway of room 104 for a fleeting, venomous moment. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The look was enough to make Eleanor's blood run cold. But she held her ground, meeting his gaze until he was gone. Ms. Ramirez returned to the classroom, her expression etched with fatigue but also relief. "He's in custody," she confirmed quietly to Eleanor. "Leo is safe. We'll be taking him to the hospital for a full medical evaluation, and then he'll be placed in emergency foster care pending the investigation and court proceedings." The wave of relief that washed over Eleanor was so profound it almost buckled her knees. It was done. He was safe. But as Ms. Ramirez gently explained the next steps to Leo, promising him safety and care, a new anxiety seized Eleanor. Foster care. Strangers. Would they understand his terror? Would they be patient enough? Hearing Ms. Ramirez mention the difficulty in finding an immediate placement equipped for a child with such significant trauma, especially physical injuries requiring specialized care, Eleanor spoke before she fully processed the decision. "He can stay with me," she heard herself say, the words resolute. "Temporarily. Just until a suitable long-term place is found. He knows me. He trusts me. A little." Ms. Ramirez looked surprised, then deeply thoughtful. Principal Thompson, standing nearby, raised his eyebrows but wisely said nothing. There were immediate, predictable concerns voiced by CPS supervisors over the phone. Eleanor's age, her impending retirement, her single status, her lack of formal foster training. It was unorthodox, highly irregular. But Eleanor, fueled by a fierce protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed, argued her case calmly, persistently. "He needs consistency right now more than anything," she insisted. "He needs a familiar face, a quiet environment. I can provide that. I will provide that." Her unwavering conviction, backed by the clear evidence of the tentative bond she'd already formed and Ms. Ramirez's supportive recommendation highlighting the benefits of minimizing further trauma, ultimately tipped the scales. After a flurry of emergency paperwork, background checks expedited, and temporary custody granted, Eleanor Vance found herself walking out of the familiar doors of Oak Haven Elementary, not towards her quiet, solitary retirement, but towards an unknown future, her hand gently holding the small, cold hand of Leo Carter. The transition was jarring, overwhelming. Eleanor's meticulously ordered bungalow, designed for the quiet routines of one, suddenly needed to accommodate the complex needs of a severely traumatized child. The guest room, previously a repository for dormant hobbies and boxes awaiting pre-retirement purging, was swiftly transformed into Leo's room. She purchased a new bed with soft, cartoon character sheets, a fuzzy rug, and a dim nightlight that projected calming blue stars onto the ceiling. She filled a small bookshelf with age-appropriate picture books and quiet activities. The kitchen required a complete rethinking. Understanding Leo's deep-seated fear and potential physical pain around eating, she stocked the refrigerator and pantry with the softest, gentlest foods imaginable. Broths, pureed soups, yogurts, applesauce, nutritional shakes, smoothies, puddings. She consulted online resources and pamphlets provided by Ms. Ramirez on trauma-informed care, focusing obsessively on establishing predictable routines, creating a low-stimulus environment, and prioritizing emotional safety above all else. Those first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion, anxiety, and microscopic progress. Leo remained largely nonverbal, his eyes constantly scanning his new surroundings with wary apprehension. Nightmares were frequent, wrenching cries shattering the stillness of the house, leaving him trembling and inconsolable. Eleanor would sit with him, sometimes for hours, simply holding him or murmuring soothing words until the terror subsided. Eating remained the biggest hurdle. Mealtimes were fraught with tension. Eleanor never pressured him, never cajoled. She simply prepared soft, nutrient-dense meals, placed a small portion before him alongside her own plate, and ate calmly, talking quietly about neutral topics, the birds outside the window, the colors in a picture book. For days, he wouldn't touch anything. Then, one morning, he tentatively took a tiny sip of a smoothie she'd left beside his plate. Eleanor felt a surge of triumph disproportionate to the act itself, careful to keep her reaction neutral, offering only a quiet, genuine smile. Each subsequent sip, each hesitant spoonful of yogurt swallowed without recoiling, felt like a monumental victory. She learned his triggers: sudden loud noises, raised voices, even on television, unexpected movements, and meticulously adjusted her behavior and environment to minimize them. The house became a haven of quiet predictability. Eleanor, accustomed to the structured autonomy of her classroom and the peaceful solitude of her evenings, found herself navigating uncharted territory. She was constantly tired, second-guessing her decisions, worrying if she was doing enough, doing the right thing. Self-doubt was a frequent companion in the late-night hours after Leo finally fell into a restless sleep. She had no experience with parenting, let alone parenting a child who had endured such profound horrors. Yet, giving up never occurred to her. She attended therapy sessions with Leo, met regularly with Ms. Ramirez, absorbed information, asked questions, and fiercely advocated for his needs within the complex child welfare system. She learned to read his subtle cues, the slight tensing of his shoulders indicating anxiety, the flicker in his eyes suggesting a flicker of interest. Slowly, painstakingly, the seeds of trust began to sprout. Leo started making eye contact more frequently, holding her gaze for a second or two longer each time. He began speaking in short phrases, then tentative sentences, his voice soft but growing stronger. He allowed her to read aloud to him, sometimes even leaning his small body against her arm, a gesture of trust that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. He started sleeping through the night more often, the nightmares receding. He began eating small, soft meals consistently, even occasionally indicating a preference. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the porch swing watching squirrels chase each other in the yard, Leo pointed and whispered, "Funny," a simple observation, devoid of laughter, but acknowledging amusement. Another milestone. His posture, once perpetually slumped in a protective crouch, began to straighten. He started drawing again, and this time the pictures weren't just empty plates. Tentative splashes of color appeared: a blue sky, a green tree, a yellow sun, and often, two figures holding hands, one tall and silver-haired, one small with dark hair. One evening, watching a nature documentary about playful otters, a sound escaped him, a soft, breathy giggle, startled and quickly suppressed, but unmistakably a laugh. Eleanor froze, hardly daring to breathe, tears welling up. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Meanwhile, the legal battle churned on. David Carter fought the termination of his parental rights, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Eleanor's meticulous notes, the medical reports detailing the horrific state of Leo's mouth and signs of chronic malnutrition, Leo's own carefully elicited testimony given with Eleanor and his therapist present. Eleanor attended every single court date, sitting stoically through harrowing details, her presence a constant, unwavering source of support for Leo. When the question of permanent placement became the central focus, the initial presumption favored placement within the foster system or with distant, unknown relatives who had belatedly surfaced. But Leo's therapist argued passionately about the potential damage of disrupting the secure attachment and profound healing that had occurred under Eleanor's care. Ms. Ramirez submitted reports detailing Leo's remarkable progress: weight gain, improved verbal skills, reduced anxiety behaviors, increased social engagement at school, where Eleanor had carefully managed his return part-time. She highlighted the unique bond the trust painstakingly built. The final hearing felt momentous. The courtroom was quiet, formal. Eleanor sat straight, Leo's small hand gripping hers tightly. The judge, an experienced family court jurist, reviewed the thick files, listened intently to the arguments from the lawyers, the recommendations from the therapist and CPS. She acknowledged the procedural norms, the standard preference for kinship placements. She also acknowledged the initial concerns about Eleanor's age and single status. Then she looked directly at Eleanor, and then at Leo, who looked back at her with eyes that were still wary, but no longer terrified. The law requires this court to prioritize the best interests of the child above all other considerations, the judge stated, her voice clear and steady. While the circumstances are unusual, the evidence of this child's recovery, his sense of safety, and the profound positive impact of Ms. Vance's care is undeniable. Severing that bond now would inflict further trauma. Therefore, it is the decision of this court that permanent guardianship is granted to Eleanor Vance. A collective exhale seemed to fill the courtroom. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks, blurring her vision. She pulled Leo close, burying her face in his hair, whispering, "It's okay. We're okay. We're family." He clung to her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her neck. The quiet, unassuming schoolteacher who had simply noticed a little boy who wouldn't eat, who had acted on instinct and empathy, who had offered temporary shelter, was now, in the eyes of the law and in the truth of her heart, his mother. As they walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, stepping from the somber formality into the bright afternoon sunlight, Eleanor felt the weight of the past 40 years settle into a new configuration. Her retirement plans seemed like a faded photograph from another life. Ahead lay a different kind of future, challenging but infinitely richer. That evening, the silence in the bungalow wasn't empty. It was peaceful, punctuated by the soft rhythm of Leo's breathing as he slept soundly in his own bed, finally safe, finally home. The journey wasn't over, but the path forward was now illuminated by the quiet courage that had refused to look away, and the extraordinary love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, when a reserved fourth grader steps quietly through Ms. Delaney's classroom door, he seems like any other child with a shy personality. But as the days pass, one alarming incident reveals a darkness behind his silence, thrusting a caring teacher into a race against time to save him from an unimaginable threat. Before we begin this story of hidden terror, resilience, and the unwavering bond between a teacher and a voiceless child, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you believe in the power of compassion, please like this story and subscribe for more. Ms. Delaney had always arrived at Westbridge Elementary before the sun fully rose, enjoying the soft hum of the building before children's laughter and chatter filled the halls. She was in her early 40s, with graying curls that framed a face marked by kindness and the faint lines of years spent smiling at her students. She prized the early morning calm, that precious half hour when she could sip coffee at her neat wooden desk, lay out her lesson plans, and review any notes about her new students. This routine anchored her, preparing her to greet each school day with patience and positivity. On a Monday morning in mid-September, she was setting up an art station for a project on fall leaves when she glanced at her class roster. She noticed a new name, Milo Thompson. There was a short note from the administration that Milo had transferred from another district, recently placed in a foster home with a man named Alan Briggs. Ms. Delaney had seen many children in foster care pass through her classroom, some thriving, others grappling with transitions. The note didn't offer further details, so she made a mental note to keep an eye on him, ensuring he felt welcome. The first bell rang, and soon the hallway filled with the clamor of children streaming in, their voices blending into a cheerful cacophony. Ms. Delaney rose from her seat, stepping into the corridor to greet them with a warm smile. The older students ambled by, while the younger ones hurried, eager to settle in. That was when she spotted a small, slight figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Motionless, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning for something familiar. She guessed that must be Milo. Ms. Delaney made her way over. She noticed Milo was clutching the strap of his backpack in both hands, fingers twisting the fabric anxiously. He wore standard clothes for a fourth grader: jeans, a plain t-shirt, sneakers. But he carried himself with a furtiveness that tugged at Ms. Delaney's instincts. She bent slightly to greet him at eye level, smiling. "You must be Milo," she said softly. "I'm Ms. Delaney, your teacher. Welcome to our class. Can I help you find your desk?" Milo lifted his eyes for the briefest moment, blinking. Then he gave a single nod, words conspicuously absent. Ms. Delaney's smile gentled. She led him to the classroom, pointing out the coat hooks, the cubbies for backpacks, and finally, the seat labeled with his name in neat cursive. He slipped into the chair, gaze averted from the other children who drifted by, exchanging greetings. Ms. Delaney watched him, concerned. Perhaps he was just shy, or maybe dealing with the upheaval of a new foster home. Over the next few days, Ms. Delaney encouraged Milo to participate in small ways, answering a question on the board, sharing a fact about himself in morning circle. He complied quietly but never uttered a single sound. Instead, he gestured, a shake or nod of the head, or simply scribbled a brief note on a scrap of paper. "I'm fine," or "yes/no," always in a neat, compact handwriting. It was odd, as though he was physically capable of speech but willfully refused. Ms. Delaney gently tried to coax him, asking if he felt comfortable reading aloud. Each time, Milo shook his head, tension rippling through his posture. She grew more concerned with each passing day. Typically, shy children would thaw a bit after a week or so. They would whisper a thank you or murmur a yes at snack time. But Milo never made a sound. It was not petulance or anger that Ms. Delaney saw in his eyes, but fear. His silence was guarded, as though trained. She decided to mention it to the school counselor, Ms. Pickens, who suggested maybe selective mutism, an anxiety disorder that prevents children from speaking in certain settings. Ms. Delaney nodded, considering that possibility. But something in the boy's expression told her there was more to it than anxiety alone. She had taught a child with selective mutism before, and this felt different, more deliberate, as if Milo was compelled by some invisible force to keep quiet. One morning, Ms. Delaney tried a gentle approach, kneeling beside Milo's desk during a writing exercise. The other kids were bustling around in a group activity, so she and Milo had a moment of relative quiet. She whispered, "Milo, I want you to know it's okay to speak if you want to. There's no rush or pressure. But if anything bothers you, you can tell me, or write me a note." Milo stared at her, eyes wide, then quickly dropped his gaze to his paper. She saw the faint quiver of his lip, as though a torrent of words might erupt if he dared. But he said nothing. Ms. Delaney patted his shoulder softly before moving on, her heart heavy with worry. Days slipped by with no change. Milo turned in his assignments promptly, all impeccable, but never participated in class discussions. He nodded or shook his head in response to Ms. Delaney's questions. He politely complied with instructions, never causing trouble. Yet Ms. Delaney's concern deepened each time she spotted that haunted look in his eyes, as though he were bracing for something. She tried calling his foster father, Alan Briggs, but the man was curt. "Milo's just reserved," Briggs said in a clipped tone. "He doesn't talk much. Don't fuss over it." Then he hung up. The abruptness made Ms. Delaney uneasy, but she had no proof of wrongdoing. The inciting incident arrived unexpectedly on a crisp October afternoon. The school held a routine fire drill. The alarm shrieked suddenly, cutting through the comfortable hum of classroom activity. Ms. Delaney, accustomed to these monthly drills, calmly instructed the children to line up and exit the room. But the moment the alarm blared, Milo's face went stark white. He lurched away from his desk, arms wrapping around his ears. Ms. Delaney tried to guide him to the line, but he collapsed under the desk, trembling violently, eyes glazed with raw terror. He pressed his palms to his ears so hard his knuckles whitened. It was a meltdown beyond typical fright. He looked as if the alarm unleashed a primal fear in him. "Sure, it's okay," Ms. Delaney murmured, stooping beside him. "We need to go outside. It's just a drill." But Milo couldn't move. He was rigid, breath ragged. Ms. Delaney gestured frantically to the teaching assistant, who escorted the other children out. She crouched there, speaking in a gentle tone, coaxing Milo to stand. Finally, the assistant returned, and together they half-lifted Milo from the floor. He stumbled as Ms. Delaney guided him down the hall and out to the playground, where the rest of the students were lined up by class. Once the alarm cut off, Milo remained stiff, eyes empty. Ms. Delaney felt a jolt of alarm. This was no typical anxiety. He was petrified. She wrapped an arm around him, rubbing his shoulder. He clung to her jacket like a lifeline, still refusing to speak. She whispered reassurance until the drill ended and they were cleared to return inside. That night, Ms. Delaney couldn't dismiss the memory of his face as the alarm blared. She paced her living room, sipping chamomile tea, replaying the day's events. Milo had not just panicked. He had seemed convinced that something catastrophic was about to happen. Ms. Delaney had seen genuine terror in abused children before, so a horrifying possibility gnawed at her. Was Milo's silence linked to some trauma inflicted by a caregiver? She recalled the dismissive tone of Alan Briggs on the phone and felt a shudder. Could that man be hurting him? The next morning, Ms. Delaney contacted the school counselor again, describing the meltdown in detail. Ms. Pickens agreed it was concerning, but recommended a standard approach, documenting incidents, requesting more records. Ms. Delaney bristled at the bureaucracy. She reached out to the Department of Child Services, describing Milo's meltdown, his absolute silence. The official on the line sounded polite but unconvinced. "We can schedule a follow-up with Mr. Briggs, but we need something more concrete," they said. Ms. Delaney felt frustration building but thanked them anyway, hoping they'd truly investigate. Days ticked on, and Ms. Delaney sensed no immediate changes. Milo returned to his seat each morning, silent, eyes lowered. Yet Ms. Delaney spotted small signs of distress. He flinched if a door slammed, or if a teacher raised their voice down the hall. He refused to play with the other children at recess, standing apart like a ghost on the fringes. Some classmates tried inviting him into a game of tag, but Milo shook his head vehemently. One day, Ms. Delaney found him perched in the corner of the library during free reading, arms folded tight. She asked softly if everything was okay. He scribbled on a scrap of paper, "Fine," then folded it so no one else could see. Ms. Delaney's heart ached, certain fine was far from the truth. Her determination led her to contact Alan Briggs once more. This time, she insisted they meet in person after school. He reluctantly agreed, showing up in a battered SUV. He was a tall man in his 50s wearing a worn plaid shirt. His eyes were cold, his answers curt. Ms. Delaney thanked him for coming, explaining that she was worried about Milo's silence and panic attack during the fire drill. Briggs shrugged, claiming Milo was like that he didn't want to talk. Ms. Delaney asked if Milo had shown any fear at home. Briggs gave a dismissive grunt, saying the boy was too sensitive and that she should back off. Ms. Delaney suppressed anger, politely pressing if there was any trauma. Briggs's face hardened. "No, he's just quiet," he insisted before striding away, leaving Ms. Delaney in the hallway. The entire exchange left her uneasy. Something about Briggs's demeanor spelled trouble. That evening, Ms. Delaney scoured Milo's meager file again, searching for anything that might have been overlooked. She noticed a pattern. Milo had cycled through multiple foster placements within a single year, each time described as uncommunicative. She found a note from a previous teacher. "Milo refuses to speak. He uses gestures or notes to communicate." Sudden startles at loud sounds. Child is withdrawn. It was the only remark with no follow-up. Ms. Delaney felt her frustration spike. How had no one probed deeper? Desperate for answers, Ms. Delaney reached out to an acquaintance in local law enforcement, Detective Lena March. March had once given a presentation at the school about recognizing abuse. Ms. Delaney emailed her, explaining the situation. Within a day, March responded with a phone call. She listened intently as Ms. Delaney described Milo's meltdown, his absolute silence, the suspicious vibe from Briggs. March's tone grew grim. She admitted there had been a prior complaint involving Briggs about 2 years ago, tied to another foster child. That child had also refused to speak, but no proof of abuse surfaced and the complaint was eventually dismissed. Ms. Delaney felt a chill at the coincidence. Another silent child. The file had been closed for lack of evidence. Ms. Delaney asked if they could reopen it. March explained they'd need fresh grounds, but she was willing to help Ms. Delaney dig deeper. Ms. Delaney's pulse pounded, a mix of relief and worry. At least someone believed her enough to investigate. The next day, Ms. Delaney arrived at school early, rummaging through any additional paperwork or nurse visits that might reveal physical harm. She found nothing conclusive, no official injuries. She resolved to watch Milo even more closely, hoping he'd slip some sign if the abuse was real. Her gut told her Briggs had inflicted some kind of psychological punishment, perhaps threatened him into silence. Her chance to glean more emerged unexpectedly. While the class was doing quiet reading, Ms. Delaney noticed Milo tapping his pencil and staring off, eyes haunted. She sidled over, crouched beside him. He stiffened, but she gently offered him a little notepad. "If there's anything you need to tell me that you can't say out loud," she whispered, "you can write it here." He blinked, flicking his gaze to the other children, then to Ms. Delaney, as if assessing if it was safe. She gave a reassuring nod and moved on, letting him be. Hours later, just before dismissal, Ms. Delaney saw Milo slip the notepad back onto her desk when no one was looking. She waited until the bell rang and the kids rushed out to buses. Milo stayed close to her desk as if wanting to see her reaction, but then he hurried off, fear etched in his posture. When the classroom emptied, Ms. Delaney opened the notepad. On one page, there was a single word spelled by traced letters, HELP. Each letter was etched softly, as though he was terrified of writing it too boldly. Ms. Delaney's stomach flipped. He was pleading for help. She snapped a quick photo of the page on her phone, tears threatening to surface. This was the confirmation she needed. Without delay, Ms. Delaney called Detective March, describing the note. The detective's tone sharpened with urgency. "That's enough to push for an official interview," she said. "We can't barge in with an arrest, but we can request a welfare check with a stronger basis. Could you document it further? Maybe film him tracing the letters? Or get him to show fear of Briggs?" Ms. Delaney felt uneasy at the idea of filming Milo secretly, but if it meant saving him, she was willing. March promised to coordinate with CPS for an emergency check, using Ms. Delaney's new evidence. The next day, Ms. Delaney discreetly kept an eye on Milo. She tried to coax him into writing or nodding about the word help, but he was skittish as though terrified of being caught. She decided on a gentler approach, letting him know she was on his side. "Milo," she murmured when they were alone in the classroom at lunch, "I saw what you wrote. I believe you. I want to help you. You're not alone." Milo nodded rapidly, tears shimmering in his eyes. Ms. Delaney's heart clenched. She asked if Briggs hurt him. Milo's eyes darted around. Then he scribbled on a sticky note, "Not allowed to speak." Ms. Delaney gently touched his hand. "It's okay to speak to me," she said softly. "He can't punish you here." But Milo only shook his head, lips trembling. Ms. Delaney nodded, letting him slip away to rejoin the group, her mind whirling with heartbreak. That evening, Ms. Delaney borrowed the school's small tablet, determined to capture footage. The next day, after class, she asked Milo to stay for a moment to help with a classroom chore, an excuse to be alone with him. She quietly set the tablet in video mode, positioned discreetly on her desk. Then she handed him a blank sheet. "Milo," she said gently, "could you show me again what you wrote yesterday? Only if you want." His eyes darted to the door. She gave him a reassuring nod. After a tense moment, Milo exhaled shakily and traced the letters with his finger. H, E, L, P. Each letter took shape in the graphite he pressed lightly on the paper. Ms. Delaney's heart thudded as she saw tears well in his eyes. He mouthed something, but no sound emerged, like he physically couldn't let the words out. Ms. Delaney, tears in her own eyes, whispered, "Thank you, Milo," then gently closed the camera app when he finished. She made sure to label the footage carefully. She sent the video to Detective March, who responded swiftly, "This is exactly what we need to get a more intense welfare check. Let me coordinate with CPS. We'll visit Briggs's place unannounced." Ms. Delaney sighed with relief, praying they'd uncover enough evidence to free Milo from that environment. She dreaded the idea that Milo would go home each evening to silent torment. The welfare check happened on a Friday. CPS and Detective March arrived at Briggs's suburban home, a neat, single-story house with a well-tended lawn. Ms. Delaney awaited news anxiously at school, pacing her classroom after the final bell. She received a call from March hours later. He was calm as usual, the place immaculate, the fridge stocked, March reported, frustration evident in her voice. "We found no direct sign of physical harm." Milo refused to speak or write anything in front of them. He just stared at the floor. Briggs answered every question politely, insisted Milo's simply a quiet child. Ms. Delaney felt panic rising. "But we have that video," she insisted. March sighed. "We showed it to CPS, but apparently Briggs says Milo's playing a game for attention, that Ms. Delaney is overreacting. Without more proof of actual abuse, like bruises or a statement from the child in front of them, they can't forcibly remove him." Ms. Delaney's eyes stung with tears. She'd been so sure they had enough. March tried to reassure her, "Don't give up. We're not done. We can keep building the case. Maybe we can get a search warrant if we suspect a hidden area or diaries. But we need a stronger tip." Devastated, Ms. Delaney felt the system's bureaucracy strangling her. She spent the weekend restless, thinking of Milo's haunted eyes. On Monday, the boy returned, subdued as ever, offering Ms. Delaney a faint nod in greeting. Her heart broke anew. She wanted to scoop him up, promise him safety, but she had to tread carefully. That day, she found a new note in his desk. He said no more signs. He sees all. Ms. Delaney's pulse pounded, reading the ominous message. Did Briggs rummage through Milo's bag or threaten him for the help sign? She delivered the note to Detective March at once. March recommended that Ms. Delaney remain watchful. They suspected Briggs might escalate if he felt cornered. Ms. Delaney shuddered with dread, imagining the punishments Milo might face at home. She redoubled her vigilance at school, providing Milo extra quiet tasks, ensuring nobody teased him, reassuring him with gentle gestures that she was there. Each time, she glimpsed gratitude mingled with fear in his gaze. Weeks trickled on, tension mounting. Ms. Delaney felt helpless, the threat intangible yet oppressive. Her daily routine hinged on making sure Milo felt safe at least for those 6 school hours. She fed Detective March any small scrap of data, but still no breakthrough. Then, one drizzly afternoon, Ms. Delaney noticed faint bruises around Milo's neck that he tried to hide with a raised collar. Alarmed, she asked about them. He turned pale, scribbling "It's nothing" before dashing off. Ms. Delaney took pictures. He was obviously ashamed. She forwarded them to March, who responded that it might be enough to push for a second, deeper search. Ms. Delaney prayed it would suffice. But just as the wheels turned, a sudden crisis overshadowed everything. Late one Thursday, Ms. Delaney realized Milo hadn't turned up at school. She checked the attendance log, marked absent with no call from Briggs. Concern flared. The next day, still no sign. Ms. Delaney, frantic, reached out to March. "We fear the worst," the detective said. "We'll check his house." Hours later, Ms. Delaney got the dreaded update. Briggs's house was empty. Neighbors said a moving truck came at dawn. It seemed Briggs had fled with Milo. Ms. Delaney felt physically ill. She called March in a panic. "We can't let him vanish. We know he's dangerous." The detective confirmed an Amber Alert was out, though Milo was technically with his legal guardian. Ms. Delaney realized the system's cracks had once again allowed an abuser to slip away. She paced her living room that night, tears of fury and despair in her eyes, imagining Milo in silence, forcibly removed from the only anchor, her classroom, where he'd found some measure of solace. Over the next days, Ms. Delaney hardly ate or slept. She had nightmares of Milo locked away, never speaking. She hounded March daily, but the detective only had partial leads. Briggs had used multiple aliases. No credit cards were active. Ms. Delaney refused to accept that. She rummaged through Milo's desk once more, hoping he'd left a final clue. That was when she found, slipped into a battered library book, a single folded scrap. On it was a rough sketch, a rectangle and an arrow pointing downward, labeled floor. Next to it, a scribbled phrase, "Hide under." Ms. Delaney stared at the cryptic note, heart hammering. Could Milo have meant there was something hidden under the floor at Briggs's place? She rushed to call March. The detective arrived at the school, reviewed the note. "He might be indicating a hidden compartment in his bedroom," March theorized. "If we can prove something is hidden, we might glean how to track them, or have a better chance at an official warrant." Ms. Delaney's pulse pounded. They needed to get inside that house, but Briggs was gone. The property was presumably vacant. March said they'd see if the landlord would let them in. The following day, a small forensics team accompanied March and Ms. Delaney to the empty house. The landlord, outraged that Briggs fled mid-lease, granted them access. The place was eerily neat, every surface wiped clean of personal traces. Ms. Delaney followed the forensics folks into what had been Milo's bedroom, empty except for dust. The detective tried the floorboards with a crowbar. Eventually, they pried up one near the corner, discovering a hidden compartment. The sight that greeted them made Ms. Delaney's blood run cold. Inside were items that reeked of psychological torture. A locked dog collar, a small whiteboard with the word "silence" scrawled in black marker, a battered notebook with pages listing times and infractions. Ms. Delaney's heart clenched as she read lines like, "Spoke at 8:05 a.m. Punish." She felt sick. A cold dread settled in her stomach. This was real, monstrous evidence of how Briggs systematically enforced Milo's voicelessness. She turned to see Detective March's jaw set in grim satisfaction. Here, at last, was undeniable proof. Forensics documented everything, snapping pictures, scanning every inch. Ms. Delaney stood back, arms wrapped around herself. She recalled how Milo had traced help, how he likely wrote notes in secret. Here was the reason. Briggs had a literal system for punishing even a single word. Ms. Delaney fought tears, fury building inside her. She whispered, "We have to find Milo. He's in mortal danger." March nodded, explaining that with this evidence, they could escalate the search. They might link Briggs to more missing children or older abuse cases. Ms. Delaney realized the full horror. Other fosters in the past had likely endured the same. She prayed Milo was still alive. The next days blurred with tension. Ms. Delaney tried continuing her teaching duties, but her mind was consumed by worry. She found comfort in the calls from March, updating her. Authorities discovered multiple old identities for Briggs, some in other states, potential leads about his involvement with a clandestine group fixated on controlling children's behavior. Every new detail sharpened Ms. Delaney's sense of dread. Then a phone call from March arrived with a new lead. An old neighbor from a prior location had recognized Briggs in a remote area, near a small rented cabin. A local store owner recalled a man with a boy who never spoke, purchasing groceries in cash. Ms. Delaney seized hope, urging March to check it out. The detective assembled a team. Ms. Delaney pleaded to come, certain Milo would respond best to a familiar face if he was found. March hesitated, citing danger. Ms. Delaney insisted, pointing out Milo's meltdown history, how he might need immediate reassurance to feel safe enough to come out of hiding. Reluctantly, March agreed. They drove miles into backwoods territory, passing farmland and patches of dense forest. Ms. Delaney's pulse hammered with each mile, imagining the worst. As twilight fell, they reached a dilapidated cabin tucked at the end of a narrow dirt lane. The place looked deserted. No lights, a single battered sedan in the yard. The air felt thick with tension. Police cars lined up discreetly, officers stepping out, weapons at the ready. Ms. Delaney stood by March, adrenaline coursing. She prayed Milo was inside, unharmed. An officer tried the door locked. Another circled around. Then Ms. Delaney heard faint noises from within. A child's cry? Her heart lurched. The police forced entry, kicking the door in. Ms. Delaney hovered behind them, breath quickening. The single living area was dim, the smell stale. A small lamp flickered. In a corner stood a battered table bearing scraps of food. A door led to a rear room. That was where they found Alan Briggs, looming over a trembling figure half hidden by a bed. Ms. Delaney's chest clenched when she recognized Milo's thin form. He was curled on the floor, hands over his head as Briggs barked something indecipherable. Officers yelled for Briggs to freeze. The man spun, furious. He spotted Ms. Delaney with the group, a snarl twisting his features. "You meddling teacher!" he hissed, voice brimming with hatred. Ms. Delaney's eyes flicked to Milo, cowering near the bed. She forced her trembling legs to move closer. The police advanced on Briggs, guns drawn, ordering him to surrender. He lunged for something on the side table, maybe a weapon. In a heartbeat, 2 officers tackled him, struggling. Ms. Delaney darted around them, ignoring her own fear, to reach Milo. The boy stared up, eyes wide with shock, tears streaming. Ms. Delaney knelt, arms open. "Milo," she whispered, voice breaking. "It's me. It's Ms. Delaney. We're here." Milo stared, breath ragged, disbelief etched on his face. Then he threw himself into her arms, sobbing silently, shoulders heaving in raw relief. Ms. Delaney hugged him tight, tears streaking her own cheeks. She felt him tremble, body rigid from days or weeks of terror. Behind them, the struggle ended with Briggs pinned, cursing. Detective March barked instructions, reading him his rights. Ms. Delaney smoothed a hand over Milo's hair, murmuring soothing words. She felt him cling fiercely, a child who had known only punishment for speaking. She promised him, "It's over now. You're safe." Police quickly whisked Briggs away. Ms. Delaney guided Milo outside, where paramedics stood by. He refused to let go of her hand. She reassured him softly, "I'm not leaving you, I promise." The paramedics checked him over. He was dehydrated, some bruises, but physically stable. Ms. Delaney thanked the heavens. Detective March emerged from the cabin with evidence. More ledgers, a new punishment chart, a small set of locks and gags that made Ms. Delaney shudder. The detective shook her head. He was escalating. "We got here just in time." In the following days, Milo was placed in emergency protective custody. Ms. Delaney visited him at a local child crisis shelter, her heart aching each time she saw the silent dread in his eyes. Yet gradually, away from Briggs's watchful presence, Milo began to accept that he could speak without repercussion. He tested it with small whispers, barely audible, halting. Ms. Delaney gently encouraged him, never pushing. She brought him coloring books, small puzzles. She told him funny stories about her class, how excited the other children would be to see him free. Milo gave shy smiles, though words were still scarce. The case against Briggs gained momentum. The hidden compartment discovery, the diaries, the video of Milo tracing help, combined with the new trove of evidence from the cabin formed an ironclad argument. By the time it went to trial, the prosecution linked Briggs to multiple fosters who had reported near-identical experiences. Some had disappeared from records, suspected to be older children lost to the system. One was missing entirely, prompting a broader national manhunt. Ms. Delaney felt heartsick, imagining how many kids suffered under his tyranny. She prayed justice would come, at least for Milo's sake. The trial itself was excruciating. Briggs's defense tried to paint him as a strict disciplinarian dealing with problem children. They cast doubts on Milo's mental stability, implying his meltdown and note tracing were dramatics. Ms. Delaney's blood boiled. She testified, voice steady, describing how she saw Milo's terror daily, how he collapsed under the alarm, how he scribbled pleas for help. She recounted the dog collar, the silent punishments. The jury appeared visibly moved. Detective March added a thorough account of the evidence seized, ledgers, the hidden floor compartment, everything. For the first time, Ms. Delaney saw Briggs appear unsettled. His cold composure cracked. In a pivotal moment, Milo took the stand. The court provided a safe environment, with a supportive counselor present. Ms. Delaney's eyes brimmed with tears, seeing him approach the witness stand, posture trembling. The judge allowed him to write or speak softly. He chose to whisper, each word shaky but resolute. He described how Briggs enforced silence with punishments, how he was locked in a closet if he made a sound. The dog collar was used to remind him not to talk. People in the courtroom gasped. Ms. Delaney quietly wept as Milo's tiny voice told the darkest truths. She yearned to run up and hug him, but she had to remain still, trusting the process. The defense tried to rattle him, but he stood firm, glancing occasionally at Ms. Delaney, who smiled through tears, silently cheering him on. The jury deliberated briefly, overwhelmed by the evidence and Milo's courageous testimony. Their verdict was swift. Guilty on multiple felony counts, sentencing Briggs to life imprisonment without parole. The news headline read, "Foster care monster receives life sentence." Ms. Delaney exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding forever. The nightmare was finally over. Milo was safe from Briggs's clutches. The system, for once, had triumphed. The aftermath was a mix of relief and the sobering reality of Milo's healing process. He was placed with a specialized foster family trained in trauma care. Ms. Delaney visited often. The first few visits, Milo was quiet, uncertain. But slowly, with therapy and the unwavering support of Ms. Delaney, he began to speak more. He had nightmares. Ms. Delaney learned he'd sometimes wake up screaming silently, arms flailing, until the foster mother comforted him. The therapist guided him to express his fears verbally, rewriting the story of his captivity. Ms. Delaney marveled at his resilience. She saw flickers of normal childhood joy shining through. He giggled when a puppy licked his face. He stared wide-eyed at a cartoon on TV, letting himself be enthralled. She recognized how these small joys signaled progress from the shadows he'd endured. One poignant day, Ms. Delaney brought Milo back to Westbridge Elementary for a short, careful visit. He was cautious stepping into the building. The echo of footsteps in the hallway seemed to stir memories, but Ms. Delaney kept a protective hand on his shoulder. The staff who knew of his ordeal welcomed him warmly. No pressure, just gentle smiles. They walked him through his old classroom, where the walls were decorated with new student art. Milo paused by his former desk, running a finger along its surface. Ms. Delaney gently asked if he wanted to say anything. Milo swallowed, then managed a small, trembling sentence. I'm okay now." That short phrase felt like a triumphant cry of freedom. The weeks turned into months. Ms. Delaney's role in Milo's life remained important. She served as a consistent figure, bridging his traumatic past with the safe present. The Fosters and the therapist recognized how Ms. Delaney's presence reassured him that not all adults demanded silence. She proudly watched him flourish academically. He caught up on missed work, proved adept at reading and writing. He joined a small reading club, occasionally volunteering a few soft words during discussion. That was enough to make Ms. Delaney's eyes mist with gratitude. Meanwhile, the broader investigation uncovered that Briggs had used multiple aliases across state lines, leaving behind a string of children psychologically scarred. Some testified in other jurisdictions, strengthening the legal net. The missing child remained unaccounted for, spurring a national alert. Ms. Delaney prayed for a miracle, but recognized this sorrow might remain unresolved. She poured her energies into ensuring that, for Milo, at least the horror ended. Ms. Delaney also contended with her own emotional fallout. She found herself waking from nightmares of Milo's pinned expressions, or the memory of discovering that hidden compartment in the floor. She confided in a friend, acknowledging how the ordeal reminded her of the heavy responsibility teachers carry. "We're the eyes and ears for these kids, sometimes the only ones who see the truth," she told her friend. "I almost missed the signs." The friend assured her that she'd done everything right, that sometimes the system was too slow, but Ms. Delaney's persistence saved Milo's life. One bright March afternoon, Ms. Delaney was invited to watch Milo's therapy session. She sat in a corner, observing as Milo's therapist guided him through role-playing exercises. The boy hesitated at first, but eventually mustered the courage to talk about how he felt in Briggs's house. Ms. Delaney's chest ached as he described hearing the clock tick, terrified that any accidental sound might trigger punishment. Then, in a quiet, shaky voice, he said, "But Ms. Delaney told me I could talk. She told me I was safe." Ms. Delaney's eyes brimmed with tears. She felt a surge of protectiveness and pride. He was reclaiming his voice. In the final act of closure, Ms. Delaney invited Milo and his fosters to a small dinner at her home. She prepared a simple homemade meal, spaghetti, garlic bread, a salad. The fosters arrived, smiling, and Milo walked in with cautious curiosity. Ms. Delaney's cozy living room, lined with books and scented with fresh bread, contrasted sharply with the austere environment he once suffered in. They ate together, laughter warming the air. Ms. Delaney watched Milo with wonder as he asked for more bread in a soft voice. She realized how far he had come. After dinner, they chatted about his therapy progress. He mentioned having fewer nightmares, that the therapist said he was making big steps. Ms. Delaney nodded, tears threatening to form again. Eventually, they ushered Milo to Ms. Delaney's small den, where she had a shelf of children's books. She let him pick one out. He chose a simple early chapter book about friendship. He sat on the couch, fosters on either side, Ms. Delaney nearby. In a gentle voice, he read a paragraph aloud, stumbling a bit but pressing on. Ms. Delaney, fosters, and Milo all smiled at each sentence. This was a victory surpassing any typical academic milestone. It signified that he felt safe enough to voice the words on the page. Ms. Delaney found herself blinking back tears. She reached out and ruffled his hair lightly, beaming. He looked at her and smiled with more confidence than she'd ever seen in him. Over the next months, Ms. Delaney and Milo maintained a close bond. He occasionally visited Westbridge Elementary, meeting classmates who asked where he'd gone. Ms. Delaney explained carefully that Milo had been away but was doing better now. Milo, still quiet, nodded politely. Some children welcomed him with easy acceptance, offering him some of the normalcy he'd missed. He even joined a small group in the playground, though he stayed cautious around loud noises or sudden movements. Each step gave Ms. Delaney fresh cause for hope. During the summer break, Ms. Delaney kept in touch with the fosters, who reported steady progress. Milo occasionally slipped into silence under stress, but he no longer believed he was forbidden to speak. Therapy continued. Ms. Delaney visited from time to time, bringing new books. She discovered that Milo enjoyed writing little stories, comedic ones about animals in a magical forest. She felt tears at how his writing, once used to beg for help, had turned into a medium for creativity and joy. The day of Briggs's final sentencing hearing arrived. Ms. Delaney learned the appeals were exhausted, the guilt unchallenged. The court reaffirmed life in prison without parole. Ms. Delaney sat in the gallery, seeing Briggs escorted in, shackled. His eyes roved over the crowd, landing briefly on Ms. Delaney with disdain, but she refused to flinch. She reminded herself that he had no power anymore. He was a man consumed by cruelty, stripped of his illusions. She breathed a sigh of relief as the judge read the final statement, condemning Briggs's actions as calculated cruelty beyond measure. The sense of finality, of a chapter closing, filled her with trembling relief. Afterward, Ms. Delaney visited Milo's fosters. The family invited her for a celebratory dinner. Milo greeted her at the door with a small, shy grin, and spoke softly, "Hi, Miss Delaney." She nearly cried at how natural his voice sounded. They explained the news. An adoption was possible, if all went well. Milo gripped Ms. Delaney's hand, whispering, "I don't have to keep moving, right?" She shook her head, voice quavering, "No, sweetheart. You can have a real home now." Time passed. Milo integrated into his foster's world so well that adoption became official. Ms. Delaney came to the courthouse that day, standing behind them as the judge finalized it. Milo's new mother and father beamed. Ms. Delaney snapped a photo at their request. Milo wore a small tie and looked both excited and overwhelmed. After the ceremony, he tugged Ms. Delaney's sleeve, leading her aside. "Thank you," he whispered. She kneeled to meet his eye level. "You did the brave part, Milo," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You asked for help. I just answered." He clung to her in a brief hug, no longer paralyzed by fear, tears shining in both their eyes. In the following weeks, Ms. Delaney started her new school year. Another group of bright, curious faces filled her classroom. But each day, she carried a deeper sense of responsibility, gleaned from Milo's ordeal. She took extra care to watch for odd behaviors, hidden bruises, or abrupt changes in mood. The staff recognized her vigilance, some calling her the Child Whisperer. She accepted the nickname with a humble smile, recalling the heartbreak that taught her never to overlook a silent plea. Occasionally, Milo popped by with his fosters, bringing Ms. Delaney homemade cookies or little crafts. She saw the way his posture no longer cowered. He joked, though quietly, with other kids, even smiling easily. Ms. Delaney congratulated him, praising every achievement in reading or new hobby. He glowed under her encouragement. She marveled at how, in the face of monstrous cruelty, a child's spirit could rebound given love and patience. One autumn afternoon, about 2 years after Milo's rescue, Ms. Delaney wrapped up class and found him waiting in the hallway, now a 6th grader. He had grown taller, hair neatly trimmed, eyes bright. He asked if he could speak to her alone. She agreed, curious. They stepped into her empty classroom. Milo inhaled, shoulders lifting. "I wanted to tell you, I started singing lessons," he said softly, cheeks coloring with a hint of embarrassment. Ms. Delaney's eyes widened, tears instantly gathering. She recalled how once, even the smallest noise brought him fear of punishment. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed. Milo nodded, a shy grin forming. "I like the teacher. She says I have a nice voice." Ms. Delaney laughed, gently, wiping at her eyes. "I knew it was in there," she said, voice trembling with emotion. Milo shifted, fiddling with his sleeve. "He can't stop me now, right?" Ms. Delaney's chest tightened at the memory of Briggs. She placed a hand on his shoulder, unwavering. "Never again," she affirmed gently. "Your voice belongs to you, Milo. He can never take it away." Milo nodded, relief etched on his face. They embraced, Ms. Delaney silently thanking fate for guiding her to fight for him. A month later, a small winter holiday performance took place at Milo's middle school. Ms. Delaney was invited by the Fosters, who said Milo would be singing in a short ensemble piece. She sat in the auditorium, nerves fluttering in excitement, and soon the children filed on stage. Ms. Delaney recognized Milo in the back row, scanning the crowd. He spotted her, offering a tiny wave. Then the music began, an uplifting tune about hope and renewal. Milo sang softly, overshadowed by louder voices, but he was there, contributing his own notes. Ms. Delaney felt tears slip down her cheeks, recalling how she once found him under a desk, paralyzed by silence. Now he was part of music, no longer stifled by fear. The transformation was profound, a testament to resilience and compassion. After the show, Ms. Delaney congratulated him in the hallway, hugging him. He beamed with pride. Other parents bustled around, but the Fosters gave them space for a private moment. Milo quietly said, "Thank you for hearing me when I couldn't talk." Ms. Delaney's throat tightened. "I will always hear you, Milo." Then she brushed a tear from his cheek, smiling. He grinned in return, eyes glowing with a new confidence. She remembered how impossible that grin had once seemed. As life went on, Ms. Delaney occasionally reflected on the steps that led to Milo's rescue. The meltdown under the fire alarm, the discovered dog collar, the hush of a child forced into silence. She thanked her instincts for pushing her to call Detective March, for filming his note, for challenging the system's complacency. She reminded her colleagues to trust their gut when something felt off, to champion even the subtlest cry for help. Because in Milo's case, the difference between a life defined by silence or one filled with music had been a single teacher's willingness to see what others overlooked. And so, Ms. Delaney continued teaching, nurturing each new wave of students, forever changed by the knowledge that a child's unspoken terror could hide behind a calm facade. She integrated the lesson into her daily approach. Keep watch, keep caring, don't assume. In that sense, Milo's voice became part of Ms. Delaney's teaching philosophy, echoing in every warm smile and gentle reassurance she gave to every hesitant child. Late one evening, Ms. Delaney sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and thinking about the difference that small gestures made. She recalled the day Milo traced the word, help. That silent plea had opened the door to rescue him from unspeakable torment. She remembered how once, the system nearly failed him, how one phone call from her turned the tide. Now the boy was free, building a future unbound by forced muteness. The thought filled her with a profound sense of fulfillment. In the end, Milo's story spread quietly among local educators, another example of how watchful teachers could save lives. Ms. Delaney never sought credit or fame. All she wanted was to remind others that children's odd behaviors might be coded messages of distress. She shared what she learned at staff meetings, in small trainings, encouraging fellow teachers not to give up at the first sign of red tape. Some colleagues called her a hero. She demurred. Milo is the brave one, she insisted. He risked everything to write that one word. In the final calm of a spring afternoon, Ms. Delaney locked her classroom door after another fulfilling day. She paused in the empty corridor, listening to the faint echoes of children's laughter outside. She recalled Milo's question, "He can't stop me now, right?" She almost heard his voice again, newly confident, free. A smile curved her lips. With a steady heart, Ms. Delaney walked out into the warm sunshine. No illusions about the world's darkness, but assured that, at least for Milo, that darkness had been shattered by the light of one resolute teacher's compassion. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.